Welcome to mid-Preptober, and if you've wondered where I was busy being sick because of course I was. Anything related to NaNoWriMo. I'm right. It's a conspiracy. So I finally decided on the project I'm going to be doing. If you heard a thunk, that was the project hitting my leg. It sounds weird. I debated for quite some time about what kind of project I was going to be doing. It is really heavily advised in NaNoWriMo to start a brand new project, and I have tons of ideas, so I could have done that. But when I really thought about what I wanted more than anything, one of the things I've been trying to do and failing to do for years was go back to my original first novels I completed and revamp them. And the one I'm speaking about the most is the very first novel I ever completed, and that was Clock Strikes. Now, Clock Strikes is interesting because Clock Strikes was not originally done through NaNoWriMo. I actually finished that one through a challenge called the March Hare Dare. Pretty much what happened is the host of my writing group would post a prompt. It could be a phrase, a series of words, an image, and I had 24 hours from the posting of that prompt to create a chapter or a short story. Me being insane, I was like, oh yeah, I can totally create a coherent story with all of these random prompts. I did, sort of. I think for what I was doing and as young as I was as an author, I did a pretty decent job. And I had a few friends that read it at the time and they really enjoyed it. But looking back on it with the skill set I have today, it's aged. So it is very much time for a rewrite, possibly an entire reworking, and by possibly I mean absolutely. I decided that I actually wanted to change the genre and also give my main character a complete overhaul because she doesn't seem to have much of motivation in the original, and part of that was because I was writing every chapter within 24 hours based on prompts I never knew what I would get until that morning. So I didn't really have a ton planned. Everything was incredibly last minute. So of course the character is incredibly inconsistent, pretty flat to begin with. She really only gains a personality, I would say, in the last fourth, which is not going to cut it. Now, this is the original manuscript, which, well, most of the original manuscripts. So back then I also wasn't using a writing program that kept everything in one folder. I was using individual Word documents for each chapter. There are about 42 chapters. So that was horrible. So I'm actually missing about 10 chapters at the very end, but to be perfectly honest, I don't think that's going to affect things because the way I'm reworking it, the end is going to be so incredibly different from the original, it won't really matter. Well, not incredibly, there'll be similarities. Pretty much what I'm going to do is, this is going to be a sci-fi and fantasy hybrid. So the alternate reality fantasy world the main character ends up in will be more fantasy based with only slight sci-fi thrown in, whereas the book ends, the beginning and closure of the book will be sci-fi. Now I did want to kind of make the sci-fi oddball. I didn't want it to be current sci-fi. I wanted it to be a little retro. And originally I didn't know the name for this. I knew there was probably some name for the exact sci-fi genre I was aiming for, but I didn't know the name. So I asked on the NaNoWriMo forums, and the word is retrofuturism. Yeah, that's a thing. So if you're familiar with Fallout, I guess Fallout uses that. I'm not a gamer. My mom is. The name sounds familiar. I'm pretty sure she plays Fallout. So I'll have to ask her about it. But pretty much this story is going to use a mixture of retrofuturism and hardcore fantasy in order to do its thing. Now, the real question, is this a case of rebelling? So rebelling in NaNoWriMo, if you don't know, is when you are going outside of the rules set by NaNoWriMo for creating a novel. Technically, reworking a novel that you've already done is considered rebelling. However, I'm not entirely sure mine qualifies. And hear me out here. This manuscript, this is so different from what I'm going to be doing. There's so little of this that's going to be kept. I'm really not sure if you can call this a draft. I mean, I don't even want to call the draft I have a skeleton. I feel like that's an insult to skeletons, because skeletons have structure, which I don't think my manuscript has, which is not a manuscript. It's not a draft one. I don't even really like calling it a zero draft. It's a negative. Can we have that? Is that a thing? Is negative drafting a thing? Because I think that's what I've got on my hands here. I would describe Clock Strikes as if you and a whole party just go into a dungeon and, you know, Chad's over there eating a wheel of cheese, you've started rummaging around, but none of you know exactly why. Like, the dungeon was there, you just went in, spur of the moment, you know absolutely nothing about what's going on, and you would ask one of your party members to, you know, look around the room and try to decipher what's going on with the crypt, but one, you don't think of that, and two, you have no one in your party with that skill set, because your party was also incredibly last minute. You may or may not have met at the tavern, and you may or may not have been highly drunk at the time. So none of y'all are ready, and it's mutual, because out comes Larry. Larry is a skeleton warrior. Larry comes out, he's staring at you, you're staring at Larry, and Larry comes to the very strong realization that he had one job, protect the crypt, and he's already failed because he left his damn sword in the West Crypt. Last night, Larry and the lads were in the West Crypt, having a good old time. They were mostly gossiping about the new dwarf spider that just showed up. Larry was doing his best to defend the dwarf spiders because though they are as dumb as a box of rocks, they're nice. I mean, they do what they gotta do, you know. They're kind of like the intro monster, if you will. They kind of delay the adventurers in time for the skeleton warriors to get to them, because skeleton warriors, they're a little slower. So Larry was trying to defend the new dwarf spider. Larry has a good heart, if he had a heart, which he doesn't, because Larry's dead. But he means well. Larry always means well, but Larry's not entirely bright. Larry left his sword there because Larry's an idiot. Frank knows this about Larry. Frank's another skeleton warrior. Frank may or may not have been a warlock in the past life. Him and all the other skeleton warriors are a little unclear about that, but Frank does seem to have an unholy fixation on warlocks and tends to be the first one to take him out. So they're pretty sure he was a warlock and got slighted by other warlocks. There's a whole theory with the skeleton warriors in this particular crypt about Frank's past. Larry's the one you're staring at. You're staring at Larry, he's staring at you. You've both forgotten why exactly you're standing there. It would be more embarrassing if you and Larry fully realize the scope of what's going on, but mostly it's just awkward. You're not ready to fight a skeleton warrior. You have a grand total of one weapon, and it may or may not be a broken chair leg from the previous mentioned tavern. Larry doesn't have a sword, and so the best he can do is just hit you with his limbs, which would actually do a little bit of damage because he's a skeleton, but you know, Larry's not especially bright, so he doesn't think that far ahead. The idea of using his limbs as weapons does not occur to him. Where am I going with this? Oh, Clock Strikes. So Clock Strikes is pretty much that venture. No one's ready for this. You aren't ready for this adventure. Larry isn't ready for this. No one's prepared. There's a little bit of an idea of where you are, like you know you're in a crypt, you know there's skeleton warriors, there's a dwarf spider somewhere. There's a little bit of detail there. There's a little bit of a setup for some kind of story, but not enough of it. There aren't enough descriptors to know what the crypt looks like, what it smells like. Are there any scurrying sounds all around the corner? You have no idea because that info is not there. That's Clock Strikes. Clock Strikes is barely a story. I wouldn't even call it an outline because an outline still needs some kind of drive or purpose, of which this particular party has none. And that's why Clock Strikes needs to be completely reworked from start to finish. And it needs so much work that I don't really consider it a rewrite. Well, I mean it is, but anyway. So that's my project. I've never written retrofuturism before, so this will be a first. I have read a few things that probably tipped into that, but I've never intentionally sought them out nor wrote them. So this will be interesting. So let me know if you are participating in NaNoWriMo this year. Let me know what your project's going to be. Also let me know if you've had the problem of, you know what kind of genre you want to go for, but you've never heard the name of it before. So you're just Googling every keyword imaginable trying to find out what it's called. But yeah, Godspeed to all of us. Currently, I'm just going through this and trying to see what's salvageable, which there's not a ton. Not a ton. Wish me luck.